Okay. Hi, this is Steve Rigolosi, also known as Editorial Dude. Hello, everybody. So tonight I am here with a topic that is always on the minds of every American, I think, if the popular media are to be believed, which they probably are. So the topic of the evening is dieting, but I'm not talking about dieting in terms of calories and food, but rather a word diet. So the overarching point of this video will be that writing very often can be improved by making it shorter, by looking at sentences and paragraphs and seeing how you can chop out extra words that don't add anything or extra sentences that don't mean anything to make your writing tighter and more concise and more precise. So it probably will not be a surprise to any of you that a lot of what editors do is focus on tightening the language. And we're working in a great tradition. All of the world famous editors have really focused on tightening books. I think probably one of the most famous stories is that Thomas Wolfe's editor on Look Homeward Angel cut that manuscript by about half. And the final product is still quite lengthy. And then you all know that Ezra Pound is credited as the editor of T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. And look this up on the net sometime. You can see the pages where Ezra Pound went in with his red pencil or red pen and X'd out entire sections and really focused T.S. Eliot on those passages that would convey the most meaning and get rid of things that didn't need to be there. So I want to start out this video before I launch into my list with my usual visual aids. I want to start with a classic, a book that I think probably most of you have or had at one time, and it's this famous little book here, Strunk and White, The Elements of Style. And I just would like to read a brief paragraph from page 23. And here's what they say. Omit needless words. Vigorous writing is concise. A sentence should contain no unnecessary words, a paragraph no unnecessary sentences, for the same reason that a drawing should have no unnecessary lines and a machine no unnecessary parts. This requires not that the writer make all his sentences short, or that he avoid all detail and treat his subjects only in outline, but that every word tell. So, easy advice to give, not always easy to follow in practice, I think, in a first draft. But then when you go back and revise, you should be on the lookout for ways to really cut out unnecessary words. So what I've got for you tonight are some phrases that I see pretty regularly in manuscripts that I sort of magically wave my editorial wand and I convert these long, verbose phrases into something short and tight and I think much more fun to read might be an exaggeration, but more easily readable. How about we put it that way? So let's start with number 1, and I have double-sided visual aids tonight, so I really feel like I'm branching out here greatly. So I usually speak on these videos pretty extemporaneously. You can tell they're not rehearsed much, which leads to me kind of umming and knowing. I do that because I don't think a scripted video would be much fun to watch. I don't know that this medium allows for that, for some editor sitting in his office at home. I doubt you want me reading from a script. So I like to speak kind of off the cuff and share memories and ideas. But tonight I actually have to read some things because I wanted to prepare some specific examples so that I'm not stumbling around trying to come up with something decent while you sit there and look at your watch and think, okay, Steve, let's move this along. Time is precious. So number one. Here is the wordy phrase. Be of benefit to. And so my example is, reading this book about homeopathic cures for insomnia will be of great benefit to you. So how about we change be of benefit to simply benefit? It says the same thing, and it gets rid of 3 words. So we could say, reading this book about homeopathic cures for insomnia will benefit you greatly. It's tighter, it doesn't have unnecessary words, and it gets your point across equally well. So be of benefit to equals benefit. Number 2, very, very common and extremely overused. I don't know why. Maybe we're taught to write this way, or we pick it up somewhere and then we never get out of the habit. In order to. In order to process your loan, we need 2 forms of ID. So how about we switch in order to simply to the following. 2. To process your loan, we need 2 forms of ID. That whole in order thing, they have no function other than to make the sentence more wordy. So let's get rid of them whenever we can. I find in order to has this or conveys this sense of business ease or bureaucracy. There's just something about it that is so clunky and kind of cold, and the effect that it has, I think, is that it's trying to convey that something may be more important than it really is. So let's just say 2 and get rid of in order, and our manuscripts will be shorter and more concise, which are both good things. Number 3, for the reason that. Okay, we hear this all the time. My example, I should have printed this out in a larger font because I'm really struggling to read it. Everyone should learn math for the reason that no matter how hard we try, we cannot avoid numbers. So let's replace for the reason that with because. Because is such a great word. When you're looking to talk about causation, cause and effect, there really is no better word than because. It's not a short word, it's 2 syllables. But there's no doubt when you use the word because that you're talking about a causal relationship. So let's get rid of all of these phrases that say because in 5 or 6 words rather than 1 and use because instead. So compare the sentence now. Everyone should learn math because no matter how hard we try, we cannot avoid numbers. So much easier to hear and also read. Number 4 is one that is often an interrogative question. So we ask the question, at what point? So at what point does a strong teacher become a demagogue? We could more concisely say, when? Okay. So when does a strong teacher become a demagogue? The answer to that question will tell you at what point a good teacher becomes a demagogue. Again, shorter is quite often better. Number 5. Some of the ways that. I would like to explain some of the ways that I will help the less fortunate in society. Imagine a politician saying that on the campaign trail. And oh, are politicians known for their excess verbiage? Books can and probably have been written about that. But let's not get into that right now. Let's think about changing some of the ways that to how. So compare the previous sentence with the following. I would like to explain how I will help the less fortunate in society. So much more clear, so much less wordy. The better way to go, if you ask me. Number 6 is, this is sort of a no-brainer, and yet I see it used rather frequently. And it's a 3-word phrase that can easily be chopped down to 1. So, is equal to. Why not change that to just equals? 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. It is, but 2 plus 2 equals 4 is more direct. By not adding that preposition in there, to, you're keeping the structure of your sentence simpler, and simpler often is better, as Strunk and White mentioned in that excerpt from The Elements of Style that I read at the start of this video. Okay, moving on, number 7. For the purpose of. So here's my example. We need to collect your social security number for the purpose of verifying your identity. So how about we change for the purpose of to the following. 2. So we need to collect your social security number to verify your identity. It's much more concise, and it makes the point, and like I always say, it gets in and gets out. It says what it has to say, and then it moves on. So those are just some examples of ways to look for really wordy phrases that can be greatly shrunken down into something tighter. If you look in any English handbook or on any of the many websites that talk about grammar and these sorts of issues, you will find lists. I mean, I could probably talk for 24 hours straight about all of these wordy phrases in our language that if we got rid of them completely, our language would be probably a better thing. But, you may have some pet peeves of your own, or some things that you see in your own writing that when you go back and revise, you think, yeah, I don't need all those words. So if you have some favorites you'd like to share, please hit the comment button and tell us about them, because writing is a process of continuous improvement over the course of our lives, I think. So these next few phrases that I'd like to close with are not so much issues of brevity as they are issues of having precision in the language, which if you've watched these videos, you know I'm really big on that. And I think I drive some of my friends kind of crazy with this, because even in conversation, when I'm talking, I aim for the most precise word that I can get. And other people, there's something about my mind that goes a little wacky when I hear someone say something that isn't as precise as I imagine it in writing. So, for example, I have a friend who drives a pickup truck, and he's always referring to it as his car. And every time he says that, my thought is, oh, when did you get a car? Because he drives a truck, not a car. Now, that's just me. So these are some phrases that I think are worthy of being looked at because they're often not very precise. And in some cases, their usage can be a little questionable or a little unethical. Not always intentionally so, but sometimes, using these phrases can be this particular phrase can be a red flag that someone is trying to paint a rosier picture or trying to make a situation seem worse than it really is. So the phrase I ask you to consider is this, number 8, the majority of. So the problem we have with the majority of is that in a lot of cases, you can switch out the majority of with the word most. So that is technically accurate to say most when you say the majority of. The question becomes, how large is the majority? Officially, 51% is the majority. So if a measure on the local ballot passes by 51%, you can say the majority of voters voted to pass, to make this bill into law. The word majority conveys this feeling of, so much, so many more people were for or against. But there's a big difference between a majority of 51% and a majority of 99%. So I would ask that when you're tempted to use the phrase the majority, quantify it a little bit better. I think I've seen the phrase the vast majority, and I think that's okay. I don't mind that one so much because that's saying the numbers show clearly that the majority is significant as opposed to slight. But watch for use of this in your own writing, and when you're reading and you see the majority of, you might ask yourself, what number does that represent? I'll say no more. I think you get my point. Number 9 is something that is a phrase that I see fairly often, and I hear it in conversation. In conversation, I like it. It's colloquial, and it conveys a sense of wonderment or puzzlement or a sense of the unexpected or a sense of what the heck is that all about? And that is this phrase here, some sort of. So I see it in writing, and I always ask myself, why is that phrase there? It's a lazy phrase because it leaves it to the reader to figure out what exactly you as the writer mean, right? So an example I'll come up with is she left her house wearing some sort of hat on her head. Where else would you wear a hat? So I think the implication there is, there are several implications. She wore some sort of hat. In other words, it was windy outside. She didn't feel like having her hair turn into a bird's nest, when the wind was blowing around. So she threw any hat on top of her head so that she could make it to where she was going without looking all unkempt. Or there can be the connotation in there, when you say some sort of hat, you're implying that hat was odd. That in some quarters that may be considered a hat, but it certainly didn't match my definition of a hat or what a hat should look like or the type of hat I would want to wear. So why not, rather than use the phrase some sort of hat, describe what the hat looks like and let the reader have the reaction or convey your reaction to that hat rather than implying that there is something off about that hat, but without taking the bother to explain what it was. I'm not a huge fan of a tremendous amount of description in most pieces of writing. Writing description, I think, is an art, and it's difficult to do well. And because I'm so obsessed with reading reviews by everyday readers, I see a frequent complaint in these reviews is it was too descriptive. The author went on for pages and pages of description, and I just blipped over it. I don't think that readers like a lot of description. I think they like one or two sentences that set the scene or provide such a strong visual image that they can picture what's going on, but they don't need every grain of sand on the beach described or every tone of blue in the sky rhapsodized about in great detail. But there are times when description is really useful and will make your writing more effective and readers will enjoy. So in the hat example that I just came up with, I wrote down a couple of possible substitutes for that. So instead of saying she was wearing some sort of hat, why not say something like, she was wearing a hat shaped like a cuckoo clock? That gives you a visual, right? I think it really tells you this oddly geometric thing on the woman's head may not have been what the world expected to see. Or another opportunity, her hat brought to mind an ill-constructed ziggurat. So there again, you have the idea of a hat that is not to the writer's expectations. And the reader sees so much more what's intended rather than saying she was wearing some sort of hat. So that phrase, some sort of, if you've got it in your writing, I recommend looking at it again, seeing if it's a substitute for describing something in more specific, precise detail. And if it is sort of a lazy substitute, then exit out and come up with something better. We know you can do it. So number 10, this is probably, I shouldn't say the best. This is a very, very good way to lower your word count by large amounts when you are revising. And that is to get rid of sentences that are in passive voice or passive construction. So it's pretty well accepted that we should write in active voice whenever possible. It's just much more active. It's less taxing to read when you're using action verbs and showing who did what. There's much more of a dynamic sense to the writing than these passive constructions, which lend the sense of a person or a thing being acted on by forces beyond his or her control. So this is not to say that passive voice is never acceptable. So I think until a couple of years ago, I might have argued whenever you see passive voice, nix it. Say there's a better way to do this and then rewrite it actively. A lot of editors spend a lot of time converting passive construction to active construction. Now, that said, two rhetoricians at Seattle University, John Bean and June Johnson Bube, have shown me the light on passive construction and have made a very good point, I think, that passive construction can help the reader if you're using that passive construction as a continuation of a previous sentence, where the object of the previous sentence then becomes the subject of the next sentence and is acted upon. It allows for greater comprehension than if you were to switch that passive construction around and make it active. And I really examine that because it's kind of against the editorial credo, or my editorial credo, or the way I was taught to edit books. But I really think they're onto something there. So if you think that a passive construction is really going to help your reader make meaning within a sentence, then I say go for it. But for the most part, let me toss out a number. I won't say the majority of your sentences. I'll say 90% of your sentences probably would benefit from being converted from passive construction to active construction. There's also, we see this in pieces of writing that aren't always honest with us. Passive voice can be used a bit dishonestly by removing responsibility from the person or thing that acted and placing responsibility on the thing being acted on. So I will tell a story from my youth of how I attempted to use the language to get myself out of trouble. So when I was a teenager, I worked at a supermarket, general clerk type stuff. And one of my duties was going out and herding up all the carriages in the parking lot, which took up acres, and bringing them back to the front of the store. This was, pleasant and nice weather and miserable and lousy weather. It just went with the job. And you all have had carriages, shopping carts with those wacky wheels that don't do what you want them to do. You think, tonight, for the first time in my life, I'm going to get a shopping cart that goes where I want it to go and does what I want it to do. And you're always disappointed because these carriages exist only in an ideal world that bears no resemblance to the world that we all live in. So I was bringing in, trying to get as many carriages as I could to the front of the store. And they're, sliding all over the place, not doing what I want them to do. And I'm heading right for the front doors, which were glass doors, sliding glass doors that open like this. And I really wanted to curve them so that they would go into the cart pen. But because they were shopping carts and they don't do what you need them to do, that curve that I had planned, in my ideal world, instead of curving, went straight into the front doors and kaboom! They smashed into, the doors were smashed to smithereens. So I was a teenager, but I knew that was not going to be a cheap fix. So the manager's name was Dennis. Nice man. And I thought, I can't really pretend that this didn't happen because he'll know I did it. That would, it wasn't as if a car had driven through the front doors into the produce section. it was something smashed into those doors and obliterated them. And that something was a line of shopping carts navigated none too well by me. So I'm thinking, how do I tell Dennis what happened while covering my own ass? So I came up with this great idea. I decided to use the passive voice. So I saw Dennis. I said, Dennis, I have to tell you, the front doors got broken. He saw right through that ruse. He said, how did the front doors get broken? And I continued not using I, not using, the pronoun I to take responsibility for what I did. I said, well, the shopping carts got accidentally rammed into the front doors. And he said, and how did that happen? And this went on, where I was becoming, I was torturing the language increasingly to try to get out of taking responsibility. But, I never did. I mean, fortunately, I didn't get fired, or I didn't dock my pay for the next 15 years to pay for the glass repair on the doors. But that's an example of how you can use the passive voice to not be quite honest with your reader. And check out use of the passive voice in some of the things that you read, particularly partisan pieces on blogs and elsewhere. The passive voice can be used in a very tricky way. And so when you encounter it, ask yourself if it's just a bit of lazy writing or if someone's trying to pull the wool over your eyes, as I tried to do to Dennis, the manager, who was much too smart for me. So props to you, Dennis. I haven't seen you in 35 years, but I hope you're well. So that's what I've got for you tonight. Tips for putting your prose on a diet. And as I promised in other videos, I would like to close with a recommendation for a writer that I like. As always, I'll talk about why I like this writer, who I think will also enjoy this writer, as well as readers who I don't think will find this writer as appealing. So tonight, I would like to talk about a Scandinavian, I could say writer, but it's actually two writers. It is a husband and wife team, Swedish, that write under the pen name of Lars Kepler. And this is their first book, The Hypnotist. So here I have to reminisce fondly, but a bit sadly. I discovered Lars Kepler in a local bookstore. It was called the Well-Read Bookstore, and it was in Hawthorne, New Jersey, in their downtown area. And I loved going in there because I didn't know the managers really that well or at all, but I think they had a direct line into my brain, because every time I went in there, I found somebody new that has ended up being a favorite. I bought my copy of Gone Girl there when it was, on its meteoric rise to the top, and I discovered Lars Kepler there as well. And the Scandinavians have done so much amazing work in the mystery, suspense, thriller genre. The names, there are so many, that could be mentioned. You have to wonder, if anybody has ideas about this, please comment on them, because I'm very curious about this. What it is about Scandinavian culture, or the Scandinavian approach to the world, that makes them such good writers of this genre. I mean, there's so many of them. Arnold Dridison, Joe Nesbo, Karen Fossum, the list goes on and on. But Lars Kepler, and I should mention, I saw an interview with this husband and wife team. I'm afraid to pronounce their last name because I think I'll get it wrong, but I know their names are Alexander and Alexandra. And they're very attractive, well-spoken, like normal seeming couple. They talk about, they have several children, they tell them bedtime stories, and you look at them and think, boy, those are two really warped minds that come up with these books. They seem so sunny and pleasant, which, of course, novels are works of the imagination. They're not the sign of a tortured psyche or anything like that. I mean, I read an article by Stephen King's wife, Tabitha King, who's also a novelist, a long time ago, where she began it by saying, you write to me asking if you're afraid that my husband is going to kill my children or me, something like that. She's basically saying, no, he's a novelist. That's his imagination. It doesn't mean he's one step away from killing all of us, like Jack Torrance in The Shining. So I discovered Lars Kepler at the Well-Read bookstore, and as soon as I got into this novel, The Hypnotist, I was really drawn in. Their series character his name is Juna Linna. I kind of think of him as kind of the Scandinavian Ice King. He's very blonde and Nordic, very smart, almost never wrong. But the best comparison I could make of Lars Kepler's books, and it's not to novels, but rather to a film, is to the film Pulp Fiction, which is, I think, one of our great films of the last, I can't even remember when it came out. Is it 30 years ago now? Might be. But anyway, you know how in Pulp Fiction, things are constantly being thrown at you out of nowhere, where you just don't ever know what's coming in that movie. And there are really shocking, unexpected scenes that seem to come so out of left field that you sit there at the screen going, wow. You look at the person you're watching the movie with, because your expectations have been so turned on their head, and you've never seen anything like this. It's fascinating. It's like watching a train wreck in a good way. I mean, there's no such thing as a good train wreck. I don't mean it that way. But, Pulp Fiction really was extraordinary in that way. And I have a similar experience when I read Lars Kepler's books, because they go to such bizarre, unexpected places that it's impossible to see coming. I think if you've read a lot of genre books, you can often see things coming, right? In a good mystery, if the author's been fair about planting clues and you're trying, you can sometimes figure out who done it. That's a good sign that the author has done his or her job of planting clues fairly. Thrillers have a certain arc that you expect, and the big climactic scene and so forth. And Lars Kepler's books, especially the early ones, kind of just explode all of that. And they're very psychological and unexpected, but they're dark, they're twisted, nasty things happen, and it's not, this is not a world of sweetness and light. This is a dark world of very psychologically disturbed people who behave in ways that are understandable once you understand their psychosis or neurosis, their background, a multitude of other factors. But you don't know what's going to happen from one page to the next, and you can probably tell they're pretty big books. They're over 500 pages. Here's The Hypnotist. The second one, The Nightmare. I should cover that up with my fingers. Third one, The Fire Witness. I loved all of them. So if you're looking for something that is going to knock your socks off in that Pulp Fiction way, I heartily recommend Lars Kepler, who mentioned in the interview that I saw with them that the first name Lars is a sort of an homage to Stieg Larsson, the girl with the dragon tattoo, the Millennium Trilogy. I have read some reviews of Lars Kepler's books by people who did not like them at all, who found them almost like a pinball machine of the plot going ding, 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 bouncing around against all these different bumpers, and it not coming together in a way that they were pleased with or that they felt satisfied by. If you like a very, very linear plot with very traditional detection, I would say Lars Kepler's books are not the best fit for you. They're not like Golden Age mysteries or a lot of contemporary thrillers. They break the mold. They carve their own space in a crowded genre. And I just, I love the curveballs that they throw at me in these books. You're reading along and sort of on tenterhooks because everything is so bizarre and nothing makes sense. And then you encounter a character like the Gimp in Pulp Fiction, or some other absolutely bizarre event or person or snatch of conversation or what have you. And you are forced to pay attention, and the pages just keep turning. So even though these are big, thick books, the pace is excellent, and I can't put them down. So check out Lars Kepler if you can. I understand they have a new book coming out in, I wish I could remember the details. The later books aren't as easy to get in the US as the earlier books are, and I don't know the reason for that. But, fortunately with Amazon and the internet, if you start with the early books and you love them as much as I did, you can get your hands on the later books. I think there's 5 to date. So that's what I've got for you tonight. I've got diet suggestions and a recommendation of Lars Kepler. So as always, I thank everybody for watching, and I'll be back at some point with another video. I don't know about what yet, but that's part of the fun, isn't it? Not quite knowing what happened. Maybe I'll pull a Lars Kepler on you and toss something at you that's so whacked out you won't see it coming. And then you'll want to read Lars Kepler. Okay, good night, everyone. Thanks again.